Kind of interesting, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of interesting. Well, let me welcome our guest now that we finally got our signals uncrossed. Amanda, hello, and thanks for rolling with the punches here. Can you please introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do and what's your specialty?
Hi, good afternoon. No worries regarding signals. Thanks for having me. My name is Amanda Luftman. I am an employment lawyer in Los Angeles, California, and I practice employment law on both sides, meaning I represent both employees on their way typically in or out of employment relationships, and I also represent a lot of companies, mostly small to mid-sized companies, trying to help them manage compliance with California and the myriad of employment laws that we all face every day. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's super good for you to be good to have you here. And as you can imagine, with any group of small business owners, there's always let's just say that it's hard for us to be experts in all these different areas. So it's awesome when someone like you can come in and give us your perspective and let us, hopefully straighten us out or at least point us in some good directions. I should also just mention that my good friend Neil Berkeley is the one that connected us. Thank you, Neil. He's completely awesome. And I immediately told Neil, well, gosh, if you speak this highly of Amanda, she must be a complete rock star. So thank you, Neil, and thank you, Amanda, for being here. So to get this conversation started, let me first just say my hope is here we'll keep this to about 30 minutes, so it's going to be really quick. Let's just call this starting the conversation and asking the question. Our eventual goal would be, wouldn't it be great if we as a community of owners here could start creating some sort of a standard called, hey, we think this is what it means to be obviously in compliance with the law, but also just to be good stewards of our people and to be good ethical people. So for starters, Amanda, I shared with you this question in this thread that got started several days ago in the community where Erin posted this really intriguing question. And let me read it so that I'm not misquoting. Erin, you simply asked, what will you do if someone or one of your employees refuses to take the vaccine? And that started this conversation called, well, does that necessarily mean that someone that's been vaccinated is necessarily safe? Well, wait a minute. Do we have to disclose that if you're an employee? Because is that a medical privacy right? And so on and so on. We could obviously go down a million rabbit holes in terms of specificities. But Amanda, can you just maybe help us? How should we start approaching this overall question?
Right. And it is indeed a big question to ask. I think, Erin's point is really well made, which is it's both a question of compliance and a question of humanity and how we're going to deal with somebody with dignity, especially when we think about the fact that inevitably we're going to find in our workplaces somebody who's an outlier. They're not necessarily philosophically opposed to the vaccine, but maybe their body literally can't take the vaccine. So what are we going to do in that circumstance? For me, I always have to start because of the job that I have with compliance. What is the law? What is the guidance? Right now, we have some guidance limited from the EEOC or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, suggesting that compelling your employees to be vaccinated before reporting to work at least will not violate the ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act. I assume that many states, including my home state of California, will jump quickly on the bandwagon with lots of compliance opinions and questions. But to really answer your question a little better, where do we start? I think we start with a plan. What do we think is going to work in our specific workplace? How are we going to get buy-in from the people in our workplace? And what are our rules going to be? Presuming that we, of course, can keep them in compliance with the applicable laws.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a plan.
And so just to be really clear so that I understand and everyone else here understands, so that EEOC requirement law that you just stated said what is required or what is not required?
Well, so the question is always, if we compel somebody to do something, what laws did we violate in compelling them to do something?
Right.
And so the guidance that the EEOC has given us as of mid-December of 2020, so not too old, but already 30 days old in a rapidly moving environment, is that if we ask an employee to be vaccinated, we are not in violation of the ADA. So
Okay.
that would suggest that we are within our rights to compel an employee to be vaccinated. And of course, I would make the quickly compelling argument that we need to do so to protect the health and well-being of the remainder of the people in that workplace.
Okay. Now, this is a bit of I know we're going to get nuancy here. So, and by the way, Erin, if you want to raise your hand, ask a question, of course, feel free to drop a chat, raise your hand, anyone else as well here. So in doing some of my research for today, I was reading some articles in the New York Times about the misconception that a lot of us might believe, well, if I'm vaccinated, then I can't infect somebody. And apparently that's not really true. It's almost, I thought of it as like, when you're vaccinated, it's not like you have a rain jacket and you can't get wet. It's more like a wetsuit, meaning you can still have the virus. It's just that it's not going to harm you, but you can still transmit it to others. And so there's this presumption, well, if you've been vaccinated, then you can't hurt me, you can't harm me, so therefore you can come back to work. But that might be a misunderstanding. Do you, again, I know you're not a medical professional, but do you have anything to point out where I'm right or wrong in that?
Well, so I think that your understanding, as I understand it from the medical professionals that do surround me, is that that's exactly accurate. That just if hypothetically I were vaccinated here and I am sitting in my workplace right now, my vaccination will protect me, but not any of my coworkers or colleagues from me infecting them. Therefore, always at the ready in today's society, I must pull out my mask and still be wearing it, even if I'm vaccinated. And unless you have a certifiable population of 100% vaccinated employees, I think we're still stuck with all of our other guidelines and policies that we've hopefully implemented by now, or will
And
need to prior to.
And of course, in our industry, it's a requirement that it be fashionable and well-designed masks. So thank you for following that guidance. All right. So in terms of, like you said, making a plan, what would you suggest to owners here? Is step one to read and research? Is step one to call their attorney? And what kind of attorney is the one that's right to engage in this conversation with? Do they talk to to their health insurance provider? I mean, where would you suggest people start going to?
So that's a great question. If you have a good advisor, by an attorney or HR professional, by all means, that's always a nice place to start. But even if you don't have those kinds of resources, there are a lot of resources for COVID plans and COVID return to work. If you're in the state of California, for example, it's Cal OSHA, the Occupational Safety Hazards Association. That entity, and I might have gotten the A wrong, but there's obviously a federal OSHA. There's actually a wide availability of return to work COVID guidelines and COVID plans. So even just hopping on Google and taking a preliminary look at what somebody else has done might help drive what you want to do in your business. To me, figuring out whether you're a solo operator or you have partners of some sort or an executive team with whom you can consult, but figuring out what your return to work strategy is, how you're going to communicate it to your employees, and putting it literally, I would say pen to paper, but maybe not in today's society, fingers to keyboard to actually develop some kind of written plan and then talk to your people about what you're doing.
Yeah. Now this is the point when I think back to when I was running my business and I had 25 employees plus, I don't know, 100 freelancers or something. And I think, I dread the moment that I have to put fingers to typewriter, fingers to keyboard, and put any kind of official statement out there. It just makes me so nervous. What does it look like for me to start formulating a plan, strategy with my team, hopefully, but do it in a way that is truly compliant, legal, not going to come back to bite me, but hopefully not come back to bite anyone?
I think it's a good point. And obviously I think a lot about what's out there that can and will be used against you, right? Because I think a lot about evidence. I think the idea of having some conversations, and I've had a lot of clients have some success with this, you put together what you think the plan will look like before you deploy it, either specify and choose a committee or a task force, deploy them, have a little bit of a sounding board within your company to talk amongst yourselves, see what happens. And then if you can, if it makes sense with the dynamics and the culture of your company, see if you can sort of road test what it's going to look like before you push send and submit and send it out documents to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think about the succinct nature of what you're actually going to send out. Let's make it easy, bullet points, clean. It's not a dissertation. And it's not about what you think or feel. It's about what we're going to do and how we're going to behave in a workplace.
Sorry, Erin was just dropping in a question or two and looking for some illumination. Erin, do you mind actually jumping in and let's maybe have a direct dialogue with Amanda? I think it'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, I get like mired down in semantics a lot. So pardon me, but back to if a person is vaccinated, they can still transmit the disease. That kind of makes me think immediately, if somebody is coming back to work unvaccinated, essentially we're putting them in harm's way, no matter what. You know, they're probably coming to work on public transportation, harm's way. They're now in the studio, harm's way, even if everybody around them is vaccinated. So my question is, can we be held responsible if they do in fact pick up the disease? And then it would be hard to prove where they got it, but also I don't want to put anybody in harm's way to work. We've proven that we can work remotely. And then second, even though the entire team is coming back, can we insist if somebody has not been vaccinated that they stay home?
So these are great questions, and some of them will be dependent upon the laws of your jurisdiction. Some of them will, but let me try to give you some context anyways without doing so. Right now in the state of California, under the workers' compensation rules, if you are at work, there is now a presumption in the rules that you got COVID at work so that there can be workers' compensation coverage. Now, that's California specific and it's temporary. So I don't know if it will be enacted long-term or how long it will last, but that would certainly speak to exactly what you're concerned about, right? Which is, even if they took you're in Chicago, right? So even if they took the L, I think I have that right, to work, and somebody hacked all over them that had COVID, it's still going to be your problem because it happened at work. The second thing that you asked about is, can we prohibit them from coming to work if they don't have a vaccine? And we don't know in any jurisdiction yet. Now, that EEOC guideline is suggesting that perhaps we can. I can tell you right now, under California's very employee favorable laws, if they can prove that they have a disability or need an accommodation, then there's a really good chance we can't. But could we sit them out if they're able to work remotely? And we already know from the last 10 months, it's been a long 10 months, 11 months, that they can work remotely. We can prohibit them from coming onto our work site.
Got it.
So hopefully that was some help, but unfortunately, some of it will depend on the laws that do apply to you.
Yeah. And of course we have an attorney advising, but there's also like the law and then the reality of dealing with a company culture in which you tell somebody something.
100%. And by the way, I think that this goes to, for me, a planning and buy-in, because if I get buy-in from my community that like, hey, I'm really concerned, Erin, if you elect not to get the vaccine and come to work, because I don't exactly know what Joel has done yesterday or today, even though I'd like to assume that he's super safe. But for all I know, Joel was at a house party last night, unmasked.
And we're a small company, not super small, but there could be 40 people around and then clients roaming and all of that stuff. And we're very open with each other and casual, but that casualness means like people share. So somebody will share that, hey, I was out at this thing last night. And then all of a sudden you're getting an email like, what is that person doing? I don't have the vaccine. And it starts like a whole, that's what I was kind of talking about with the other thing. Like it can get political. It can get very emotional very, very quickly. And I don't want people being judged based on actions. I mean, like the reality is we're going to stay home as long as it makes sense, but we do need a plan eventually to return to work. And in this plan, like you say, there has to be some kind of, you're right, a very simple, this is our policy, this is what we're doing, that's that. But it's got to be simple enough and like tactful enough and like legal, like,
Yes,
you know.
no question. And as we roll out, as our government gets a little, hopefully more organized, and we roll out the vaccine so that they're even an option for people, I do suspect that the guidance will follow. So we will have at least some legal guidance. Like, is there going to be a Department of Labor point that says, hey, yeah, if you have an employee who can work remotely and who's elected or is unable to be vaccinated, can you keep them in a remote function? My guess is the answer will be yes, but I suspect we may actually have actual guidance on questions like that. There's enough people wondering.
Amanda, something I'm wondering is, do you foresee perhaps, let's just call this maybe like a general rule of thumb that might be emerging called, if let's say I'm an employer like Erin, that there's a rule of thumb called, hey, our policy is to make you aware that if you are unvaccinated and you come to work, you will at some point likely be exposed. We ask you to be aware or acknowledge or something, because I feel like that's ultimately where this is all headed is, we're trying to avoid this putting people into classes, or Erin, like you said, judging people like, oh, I can't believe you didn't get vaccinated, or who do you think you are that you did and you're superior to me, and all this kind of rigmarole. I think what it's really boiling down to is just simply us acknowledging, hey, this is a workplace. We can't fully control the environment. We're not going to screen people and put armbands on them as much as someone might think culturally that that's acceptable. Others do not. And the only thing we do know is this is not necessarily a COVID-free environment, even if everyone here says they, to the best of their knowledge, have been vaccinated, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
It made perfect sense. And I think you actually also gave us the answer, in my view, in your question, which is you use the word acknowledgement. So asking employees to waive their rights when you as the employer hold more cards than they do doesn't generally work and doesn't generally hold up. But asking employees to acknowledge that they have been informed that here's the risk, here's the choice, here's the option is a different game. Those acknowledgements and disclosures can be very, very useful to you. And I will give you we are using them, by the way, for clients already and have been since really middle of March of 2020 with respect to COVID. But a little easy example is I have a client who makes nipple covers. And because of that, she does them for fashion purposes, but because of that, there is no end of a stream of pornographic images that pour into her workplace with solicitors from other companies and all kinds of things. So we wrote a disclosure because obscenity, right, is not allowed in the workplace. It's illegal, it's banned. And we wrote a disclosure saying, hey, if you work here, you're going to come across materials that constitute obscenity. If that's not good for you, don't come.
I see. Yeah, does that make sense to you, Erin? There's this, maybe that's, I'm trying to come up with almost like that, what's that just minimum standard rule of thumb that we can maybe go forward and say, okay, maybe we're all heading towards some form of, hey, we're going to ask our employees, freelancers, clients, whatever, to acknowledge something.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. It's also what I also heard in that is by acknowledging that, to a certain extent, you're giving them the choice of when to come back. And perhaps if it's not it's like, hey, we're starting to open the doors to come back because people are getting vaccinated. If you do come back, there is a chance that you could be exposed. If you come back and transition yourself, then you are inherently acknowledging that risk. You are taking that risk. We are not telling you to take that risk.
I think that's a very good summary. And I think that is actually an approach that we have deployed many times over here already for our clients.
This has been a very, very, very useful talk. Thank you.
I'm glad.
That's the end.
Somebody asked
How do we
it.
take the responsibility off of ourselves?
It's hard, right? Because you want to be, as you said, I think I heard good citizen, good steward, right? We want to be those people. And so somebody asked in the chat, I think I saw about HIPAA, like what's the interplay of HIPAA? So I'm always trying to remind employers that sometimes we don't want all of the information. We really don't need to know. It's actually much better for us if we don't know. Right. There are certain points though where there's a balancing act. So health and safety and protection versus where. So right now, that's why we're allowed to do all the COVID screening that we're seeing everywhere, even though that is arguably teetering on HIPAA violations, but because the greater public safety is the winning power, we're allowed to ask. So I suspect, again, we don't actually have guidance, but I suspect we will be allowed to ask as employers whether they've been vaccinated or not because of the great, tremendous public risk.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in school, they ask. There's certain baselines. I mean, it is interesting how we don't even ask if somebody has had the flu vaccination. I think it's going to open conversations into other areas where we don't need to go as a group, as for other people to figure out. But
one of my friends who's a physician has said to me countless times since March 16th of 2020, the world is not going to snap back. Things are going to change. Things are different and they will be different.
And we're building a very, I'm calling it elastic workplace where right now everybody has to be remote because of the way the workstations are set up, but we've invested in making it so that they can be either in the studio. Every workstation is basically operable both in the studio and externally. And if one day they feel safe and the next day they decide they don't, or they think they've been exposed, they could just be working from home. Also, to promote working from home, if somebody feels like they have a scratchy throat or thinks they can't smell something,
please don't.
Just stay home. Just stay home. You know, like
just please don't infect them. Even if it's the common cold, we really don't know.
Exactly. It changes like our whole mentality about like, oh, but that stuff is due today. Nobody else knows the files. Like it's like a whole thing. I better just go in and crank it out. Well, now everybody's going to get the flu because he just came into the office. And I'm like the first person to admit, like I go to work, I could be dragging myself in, you know, I will work through any illness.
But it's a good reminder that.
But it's a reminder now, like that's not going to be okay anymore. But giving people the opportunity to, if they still feel okay, to be able to, you know, achieve their obligations to the studio or to be able to show somebody their file structure from home. That's like a whole nother ballgame. Now you don't have to come to work, so you can pass off your files. Things can't happen. So.
Well, I know some folks here need to wrap because we've got our 30-minute slot. So I'm happy to stick around for a little bit longer. I don't know, Amanda, if you have a few extra minutes, if you
That's fine too.
Want to hang around. For those of you who need to bounce, please give a heartfelt thank you to Amanda. And this may be a conversation we come back to now and again, Amanda, if you're open to it. For anyone that is leaving and saying, well, hey, where do I go for more information? Or can I reach out to Amanda if I need help from her? Where would you point them?
You can certainly find me, and Joel, I assume you'll share contact information, but I can,
sure.
My website at bollaw.com, bollaw.com. But there are tremendous resources actually on our government websites. So I wouldn't ignore those. And those are available to you without cost. And I understand always the joy of legal fees. So do feel free to take a look at your both local and the federal guidelines that we do have out there.
Awesome. Erin, I'm glad to hear from you that you feel like we did at least arrive on almost one core fundamental idea or approach to where this is going, and there's this acknowledgement thing, and then remaining elastic, I think is the word you used.
Yeah, sorry, I put myself on mute because I don't want to be that person. Yeah, those two things are going to be, I think, essential to keeping working and to keeping people safe and to making people feel like they have a choice. You know, I think that's going to be key, because when it comes to medical stuff, you can't tell somebody what to do with their body, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't tell somebody
Proven over and over and over, right?
you know anything, right? I don't want somebody telling me what to do with my body. And as an employee, I want to have flexibility. As a studio owner, I just need a path forward. I need some kind of plan and to communicate out to everybody as early as possible, because it's scary for them to not know, even though it's still pretty far away, in my opinion. Everybody really wants to hear, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm a designer that happens to own a company. I don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? Like I accidentally own a studio. I didn't plan to like have to deal with HR and all this other stuff. So it's a learning process.
It is a learning process. I've definitely found some clients have some really good success once they've had just at least a framework of what they want to do, to take that framework to their population and call it a town hall. And half of the game, in my opinion, with employees, and I don't care what the subject matter is making sure they feel heard. That's always half the game. I have clients who violate every conceivable law, despite my best efforts, and don't get sued because their employees feel heard and taken care of. So having a town hall or a series of town halls, not that I want you to spend all your time talking about COVID, but letting people share, hey, this is what I think. Hey, no, I'm fine coming back to work. And you know what? I realize I might get COVID on the L, and I might get COVID at my mom's house, and I might get COVID in the workplace, but I'd rather be back. And I'm okay with that. Or hearing the perspective of your own staff could be very valuable. Also in giving them an outlet.
Right. Do you think one-on-one conversations are better than town halls or open big community?
I think you have to really evaluate who you have. When we first started and I had my first law firm Zoom meeting, which I had never had one before, in March, I came at them with, I'm also I have a lot of directives, and I kind of came at them like with, here are the rules of the road. We're not going to speculate because no one knows what's going to happen. We are going to ask questions. We're going to ask questions one-on-one, or we're going to ask questions in a group setting, wherever you need to go to find, so I kind of gave them like, here's how we're going to proceed. But it depends a little bit. I'd have to know more about sort of how your team generally operates. And also, are there small pods? Like, should we go to a small group and say, hey, how are you guys feeling?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix of intro and extroverts. And I think while we're an outgoing bunch in a town hall is probably not a bad thing, people don't necessarily feel comfortable sharing in a construct like that.
Yeah. And maybe it's going to be we've used Survey Monkeys, and I'm a little law firm, but we've used Survey Monkey surveys probably 5 or 6 times through the pandemic, because then you don't have to think on your feet. And even in law firms, I got people who can think on their feet like this, and people who need a minute to process.
Yep. That's really true.
Yeah, Erin, I was just going to agree with you that I always found it frustrating that I could be, as a leader, right, talking to a group of 20 or so employees and say to everyone, this is an open forum. This is the opportunity for us to share with each other and to raise concerns and this, that, and the other. And I would even go around the room and kind of look everybody in the eye and be like, any other questions, any other concerns, any other thoughts? And still there were people that after that meeting was over would come back to me and say, hey, can I talk to you alone? And it's like, okay, I guess that's your style, even though that was the forum, that was the time to talk about it. Certain people just have a need or inability or something to And I guess it makes sense when we're talking about health and our bodies and things like this, that the tendency for that to be an issue is going to be much higher. So I think we should, it is frustrating that I like the idea of the survey, because the survey takes helps the scale question, because I'm sure like with you, Erin, you're thinking, okay, if I have 30 or 40 people coming to me with well, what about my special situation? I mean, that just is a huge bandwidth requirement. And the survey is a personal, private way to hopefully get some sense of the scale of, do you feel this way? Do you feel that way?
Yeah. Yeah. It's also good to get an initial read if something's not going to land well, or if there's an outlier. Like, speaking with my other upper management team, my cohorts, and everybody's like, I don't think there's going to be one. I don't think we got one in the mix where
I always have one.
Like, there's always one, and it's a shit storm when it happens. So
there's always at least
not say that. Don't say that. You don't know why somebody.
I used a Survey Monkey to prove that actually to my firm administrator. I was like, she's like, everyone loved it. I said, everyone didn't love it.
Did not love it. Yeah.
They were just nice about it, but everyone did not love it.
Yeah.
Right.
If I've learned anything at my time owning a company, it's you think you know, but you don't. That's what I've learned. And on this, I just know people are processing this differently, and they're, maybe somebody in their household is not going to have the vaccine, but they might say like, oh, well, my new boyfriend that I didn't know that you even had refuses to get the vaccine because he has epilepsy and he feels that it gets in the way of his medicine. And so I don't want to come to work because I'm afraid if I come to work, it's going to harm him. How the hell do you know that?
By the way, that's going to be real life scenario very quickly here. Like, I live with a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old and a husband. Right. The two of us are going to get vaccinated the second anybody lets us get one. But I can't vaccinate my 14-year-old. It's not even an option.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Good point. Sure. So in terms of just that elastic thing, it's not like, okay, on the 1st of July, everything changes. It's like, no, it's going to be these stages of, because we're getting vaccinated older to younger. So that's alone right there going to introduce some, the rules are kind of this now and they're that later.
Yeah.
Well, look, this is going to be, I think this is going to be, it's an evolving conversation, right, Erin? We're going to be coming at this, I think, over and over again over the next year, which not excited to say that, but hey, we're just going to.
2021 is going to be also work from home. I feel like we'll be here for sure.
Yeah.
Through the summer, just to make sure, because everybody's going to be out and about, and hopefully before winter we can start coming back. But
yeah,
it seems like not everybody's going to be back in the studio.
Well, perhaps, Erin, as we start to move forward on this, maybe we can come up with that little concise, several bullet points type of policy or whatever that acknowledgement thing is, and
COVID acknowledgement.
Yeah, we'll have Amanda come back and tell us why it's if we're on the mark or if we're just way off.
Fair enough.
Well, thank you, ladies.
For having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, Amanda, it's great to have you here. And Erin, thanks for jumping into this conversation too.
Thank you for entertaining all of it.
Entertaining indeed.
Well,
all right. Well,
nice to get to meet or see or, see faces on the screen. It's always fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Amanda, thank you. We'll let you go back to your busy day, and then we'll see the rest of you in the community, and we'll be back next week for another weekly briefing. So thanks for being here. We'll figure this out, everyone. Bye for now.
Thanks so much. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Okay. Thanks again, Amanda.